afternoon, New York, and the rest of our listeners around the globe. My name is June Stoyer, and I'm the host of the Organic View radio show. Our podcast is available on iTunes, Zune, and all major podcast providers. You can also visit our website at www.theorganicview.com, where you can subscribe to our newsletter to find out about upcoming guests, features, events, and other shows on our network. If you have any questions or would like to find out about sponsorship opportunities, please visit us on Facebook, Twitter, or send us an email to questions@theorganicview.com. In this special series called the Neonicotinoid View, I'll be joined today by two commercial beekeepers, Tom Theobald, and a little later on in the show, Jeff Anderson. We're going to be talking about the latest controversial systemic pesticide called Sulfoxaflor. Sulfoxaflor is a new systemic pesticide from the sulfamine family. While it's not a neonicotinoid, it is a systemic pesticide that targets the same neural receptors as the neonicotinoids. Without any prior notice to beekeepers, the EPA announced back in June of 2012 that it would grant a Section 18, which is an emergency permission to use an unregistered product for use on cotton in 4 southern states, which are Arkansas, Mississippi, Tennessee, and Louisiana. The EPA has recently announced the opening of the public comment period on sulfoxaflor. The EPA plans to grant sulfoxaflor a conditional registration despite many serious unresolved questions as to its safety and consequences not only for the honeybees, but for the wider environment as well. On today's show, we're going to be joined by Tom Theobald, who is going to be discussing exactly what happened a few years ago with Clothianidin. And then a little later on, we're going to be talking to Jeff Anderson. Welcome, Tom, to the show. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, June.
Tom, can you begin by telling our audience about yourself?
Well, I'm a commercial beekeeper on the small end of the scale, have been. This is my 38th year. More recently, I've been involved in some of the controversy over the challenges we're facing in the pesticide world, and that's one of the things that we are going to talk about today.
Now, can you explain to our audience exactly what a neonicotinoid is and why beekeepers are so concerned about them? Because there are a lot of people that hear the word neonicotinoid and hear systemic pesticide, but they don't quite understand why beekeepers are very concerned about their use.
Sure. I'll try to give a brief thumbnail sketch of what's gone on. The systemic pesticides date to about, in the United States, to about 1993, and the first of those was a product called imidacloprid. And a systemic pesticide is a pesticide which is incorporated into the plant and becomes part and parcel of the plant and is expressed in all parts of the plant. And it's a change in pest technology in that these systemic pesticides are always present. They have been used more recently as seed coatings, and they're always present in the plant. In other words, they're used prophylactically, as opposed to the older pesticides, which they were intended to replace, which are acutely toxic but will dissipate within a matter of hours or in some cases days. Imidacloprid was the first. The second of these was something called Clothianidin, which appeared on the market in 2003. It is of great concern to the beekeepers because it appears that, first of all, Clothianidin has never been legally registered. It was rushed to the market under what's called a conditional registration, the condition being the completion of a life cycle study during the first growing season to give assurance that there weren't inordinate problems for the pollinators, for the beneficial insects, with honeybees being the representative of that group. The life cycle study wasn't completed for several years. It finally was completed. The EPA denied that they had it. Finally divulged it under a lawsuit from the Natural Resources Defense Council. And subsequently, when the the company that owned that pesticide came back and asked for approval on cotton and mustard, it was reviewed again and found to be unacceptable. So Clothianidin has never met the requirements for registration and yet was registered anyway, was given full registration. And along with the other neonicotinoids, this past growing season was used as a seed treatment on about 242 million acres of agricultural land and an untold number of millions of acres of urban land. We don't know how much is used in the suburbs and in the cities. The most recent cause for concern is that, no surprise to anyone, these chemicals, because they're always present, apply enormous pressure on the target pests to develop resistance, and they have. And now that these neonicotinoids, these systemic pesticides, are failing, the next step down the ladder is to introduce another systemic, this one by the name of sulfoxaflor, which is not of the family of neonicotinoids, which have been the main cause for concern. It comes from the family of sulfamines, and while it's not a neonicotinoid, it targets the same neural receptors as the neonicotinoids.
Now, if I could just take a moment to just interject what the EPA has on its website. It says, the EPA is seeking comment on its proposed decision to conditionally register the new active ingredient, sulfoxaflor, formulated as a technical product and 2 end-use products for use in production agriculture. The proposed use sites are barley, bulb vegetables, canola, citrus, cotton, cucurbit vegetables, fruiting vegetables, leafy vegetables, low-growing berry, okra, ornamentals, herbaceous and woody, pistachios, palm fruits, root and tuber vegetables, small fruit, vine, climbing, except fuzzy kiwi fruit, soybeans, stone fruit, succulent, edible, potted and dry beans, tree nuts,
virtually everything. Really, I mean, we don't have to go through the list. It's everything.
Well, that actually is the list. Well, the importance of that is to see, okay, well, where else are they going to take this, and how is it going to expand? Just as with the neonicotinoids. The
problem with Clothianidin was it was rushed to the market without many very serious questions having been answered, and that was the reason for the requirement of the life cycle study. And what the EPA now is proposing is to unleash another systemic pesticide on the market without adequate testing, with many serious unanswered questions, and granted a conditional registration. I spent the first 10 years of my working life in the corporate world with IBM, and in IBM we would call this sort of practice doing product test in the field. In other words, we run this out into the environment and we see what happens, and the environment becomes the experiment, and all of us become the experimental subjects. This is an egregious abuse of the concept of a conditional registration. Before we get too far into this, though, we're fortunate to be able to prevail upon one of the leading U.S. commercial beekeepers, Jeff Anderson, who's a Minnesota beekeeper but is out in California right now putting bees into the almonds. And Jeff has agreed to give us a little perspective from the national level. So anyway, we can continue until we hear from Jeff.
Oh, thank you. Tom, can you explain why they are holding this comment period at this particular point, especially since they've already granted the registration previously?
Well, they haven't. The comment period is something that's required by the protocol for these pesticides that are being introduced. But what has happened thus far, in June, the EPA issued what's called a Section 18, an emergency permit to use an unregistered product. And this Section 18 allowed for the use of sulfoxaflor on cotton in 4 southern states and about 1.4 million acres, I think. And now we take the next step, which is to release this to the broader market, and that's a step that it would go through. The question is whether it should be released to the market before we know anything about it, or should those questions be answered before it's released to the market? That's the question before us. The environment, as I said, has become the experiment, and we've become the experimental subjects. And from the standpoint of beekeepers, we just cannot survive any more of this. Sulfoxaflor may be the nail in the coffin for the American beekeeping industry, and you have to understand that bees really are just the indicator species, and these systemic pesticides and this prophylactic technology has had a disastrous effect on the broader environment. Perhaps the best evidence we have comes not from science, but from a photographer, surprisingly, who designed a framework that encompassed a cubic foot. And he photographed all the life forms that pass through that cubic foot, and found that he had dozens, in some cases hundreds, of plants, birds, insects, soil organisms passing through that cubic foot. That was replicated in an Iowa cornfield, which historically has been some of the richest farmland in the history of the earth. And what they found was that there was virtually no life at all other than corn. So what we've done with these technologies is we've taken some of the richest farmland the world has ever known, and we have sterilized it for the production of a very narrow range of commodity crop. Jeff Anderson is someone I've worked with on these pesticide issues for a number of years, and although we've never even met face-to-face, Jeff and I have become friends through many, many hours of conversation. Jeff has been active at the national level as a member of the National Honeybee Advisory Board, and he's also a leading commercial beekeeper. And I asked Jeff if he would join us and just give us a little idea of what some of the things are that are taking place at the national level. So, Jeff Anderson.
Yeah. Thanks, Tom, and good morning. I'm a commercial migratory beekeeper and was invited by both the national organizations to become parts of what has now been two groups, National Honeybee Advisory Board, which is an advisory group that's been working primarily with EPA. We have also met with USDA and a number of the chemical registrants and their organization CropLife America to try and promote an understanding of pollinators and their protection among the regulating people that regulate and produce the chemicals that need regulation. It's come to our attention, that a lot of the abnormal bee mortality that's occurred in recent years is directly tied to pesticides. There are other factors, of course, involved, but pesticides very definitely are one of the factors that need attention. And on the area of systemic pesticides, the one specifically that's being talked about today, sulfoxaflor, the National Honeybee Advisory Board has registered public comments when it came out as a Section 18 material for use on cotton this last summer in several states, and we're in the process of formulating comments for the public comment period that's open as we speak. Bee industry concerns are that when EPA does a conditional registration, the primary reason they utilize that process is that they lack adequate data for full registration, and so they allow the pesticide on the market in a conditional registered form while the questions are answered. And from the bee industry perspective, that's a very dangerous problem for us because many of the chemicals are toxic to insect pollinators, specifically our honeybees. And we have been taking quite a bit of collateral damage from pesticides that have been on the market in a conditional fashion. And we have that concern with this product, Sulfoxaflor. The problem with the process is that we have no access to looking at the full studies, which are proprietary business information, but we can only look at bits and pieces or summaries of the studies. And the summaries of the study for Sulfoxaflor lead us to believe that it potentially could be a real problem in the field. And
in my reading of the law, my understanding is that the category of conditional registration was designed to address more minor administrative issues, maybe some labeling language or something like that. And it's the view of myself and many others that the conditional registration category has been grossly abused, that these chemicals present serious environmental questions that should be answered before they're registered, not after they're registered. Could you comment on that just a little?
Well, yes. I think that the governing statute, FIFRA, does allow EPA to do conditional registrations for the exact things you mentioned, minor type things that where an I is not dotted or a T crossed, but there's no reason to expect abnormal or unreasonable adverse effects, I guess is the exact term that they use, in the environment. The problem is EPA has kind of taken a very broad view of what they're allowed to do with conditional registration, and a number of the pesticides that are on the market that are toxic to pollinators have been put out with a conditional registration, and one of the conditions for registration is an adequate, EPA uses a term, core, study that proves that the relative safety of the product when used is recommended. The problem is that when they conditionally allow a conditional registration without adequate information on pollinators, often we take the abuse in the field or the damage in the field, which we believe FIFRA would preclude because EPA is charged with preventing unreasonable risk. And so while we understand the need for conditional registrations, the industry perspective is that they probably could be handled in a better fashion.
Yes. You're involved very intimately at the national level, and I'm often asked, and I'm sure you are as well, how can the public help support these efforts? And I know that the leading beekeepers have recently put together a legal defense fund. Could you comment on that just a bit?
Yes. When I first got on, I mentioned I'm a member of two organizations at the national level, and the American Honey Producers, who operate, which are primarily large honey-producing operations. Members are primarily large honey-producing operations. We probably have somewhere in the excess of half of the registered or live colonies in the United States are run by honey producer members. And we have, with our interactions with EPA through the National Honeybee Advisory Board, we've come to understand that sometimes Washington doesn't respond adequately to simple dialogue. And so the honey producing organization decided to put together another entity to deal specifically in a more forceful manner with pesticides at the national level. And you can Google the organization. It's relatively new. We do have a website, pollinatordefense.org. You can learn a little bit about what we're about on our website and or donate. We're open to donations. It costs a significant amount of money to deal with these issues on a national level.
Thank you so much, Jeff. And, gentlemen, by the way, Graham White is actually calling in from Scotland. See if we can connect Graham to the show. Graham, good afternoon. Are you there?
Good afternoon, June. Fascinating show.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Graham.
It's a bit like listening to another prophecy of another invasion from across the Atlantic. The idea that another family of pesticides is on the horizon, which haven't arrived here yet, is truly scary, because we're still dealing with the neonicotinoids here, and the industry and the regulator are just denying and denying and denying right down to the line. And they're denying with the Parliament, they're denying in European Parliament, they're denying at every possible level, and it's just beyond belief, really.
It actually predates the issue predates what's happening here in the United States. I found a response from the New Zealand beekeepers to what would be the New Zealand equivalent of the EPA, drafted in November of 2011, raising their concerns and objections to the introduction of sulfoxaflor in their country.
Yes, I
saw
that.
So this is, again, a global effort.
I saw that, and I also saw that manufacturers had managed to get an all-country registration for Korea, which they were advertising as the first truly big national success. And they made it clear that this was meant to be the first domino in the conquering of the entire world with sulfoxaflor. This is the 25-year plan, is to impose this new pesticide on the entire planet.
It's interesting, they gave an emergency approval for use on cotton in June of this past summer, and it was cotton which was approved just 2 years prior. So already this technology has failed, and the answer to that is to pile on more technology. From the standpoint of the farmers, what it means is it takes them down this chemically dependent spiral. They now will have to purchase an additional proprietary chemical to overcome the shortcomings of the previous proprietary chemical.
Yeah. I took that. I thought one of your most important insights that you gave earlier on was this idea that in the past, pesticides were applied when you got an attack of insects. In other words, you applied them after you got attacked. But what they've brainwashed us all and all the farmers into believing is that the entire landscape from horizon to horizon in every single country should be dosed with a brain poison every single planting season. And it should be in the soil and in the plants for months on end. And that's a truly frightening vision of the future.
Yes, I don't know if it went out over the air, but we talked a little earlier about the cubic foot story. The photographer who designed a framework of a cubic foot and then recorded the life forms that passed through it, and he found dozens and hundreds in most environments. They did that same thing in an Iowa cornfield and found virtually nothing. The richest farmland in the history of the earth has apparently been sterilized and will support a simple single commodity crop called corn.
Well, unfortunately, until things really reach levels that are catastrophic, I hate to say it, but that is basically what we're looking at until the necessary changes are made. I mean, the crops are going to fail. I mean, we're seeing nature fight back with the bugs that are resistant to the chemicals as well as the super weeds. And, this is just more of the whole process that I guess we have to go through until the EPA decides that they're going to do something.
We're a little short on time, June, and I would just like to squeeze in the fact that if people want to know more, they can go to BoulderCountyBeekeepers.org, click on Tom's Corner in the toolbar at the top, and we have put on that website the EPA's announcement of the opening of the public comment period. We also have put on the link to an interview that we did in June when we first learned of the appearance of sulfoxaflor, and we will be putting additional things on there as well. That's BoulderCountyBeekeepers.org, Tom's Corner.
And also, folks, you can tune in each week as Tom and I continue our discussion about neonicotinoids on the Neonicotinoid View. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. And, folks, thank you so much for tuning in. This has been June Sawyer with the Organic View Radio Show. Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Thank you.